Good day. Happy Friday, Merv. How are you doing?
It is Friday, and I'm doing well.
Good, good, good,
I
good, good.
assume I assume you're the same.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful week. The monsoons have been gentle on us this week. So it's been a very pleasurable time, both outside and inside. So, in preparing for today's meeting, I was really, really entertained by remembering one of my early mentors back in 2000. He was a project manager, and he said, Tim, treat your project and your environment like a petri dish. And I said, what? He said, yeah, it's an experiment. If you're ever going to learn how to be a leader, treat it as that and primarily use it in training and mentoring. Try everything you can. You're not going to make mistakes. And if anything, some of the stuff you're going to teach people is going to stick with you. And I did this and I realized all I need was permission to help people grow and learn. And that was the beginning of my exploration in leadership. It all had to do with training. How about you?
I don't know that I was ever told to treat it like a petri dish, because if you recall from past podcasts and past conversations, I come from a long line of fixed price projects, fixed price, fixed end date projects. So experimentation, although valuable, was frowned upon if it cost you time on the project. Because you know what they say about projects? How does a project get behind? One day at a time, right? So a lot of times, but no, I think that makes a lot of sense, because you can do some mini experiments, mini processes, especially on one-on-one conversations, to try out your leadership style, what works, what doesn't work. I don't know that I had that kind of permission, other than I just tried things. I just, I failed on some, and I did well on others, and eventually, I think as I got older and more mature, things began to click.
So we have two different perspectives of training and mentoring and supporting our stakeholders and teams. Let's start off this conversation, and let's start looking at training from a formal perspective. Have you had a lot of experience in building training into your plans, or is training more than that?
Well, as part of every contract that we worked on, we certainly had to provide training for our end user. So when we delivered the project, implemented it, we had to make sure the entire workforce was prepared to use that particular software package, and especially as it was implemented, because they often had to deal with their customers. But was your question more related to like my own teams, or the team that was seconded to me from my customer?
Let's go ahead and just put it within the domain of team for right now, and we'll explore the bigger picture here in a while. Just
Sure.
the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Every single project required training of certain people at certain times. And often it was things like, let's say we're introducing a new technology. Now, as we bid the new technology, I would bring staff on that had already had experience in that technology, but you often were short staff, you needed more. And so therefore we would get other staff to bring on and send them off to formal training. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So it has to be there. And it's
Yeah.
not just a time constraint, but it's also a budget constraint that you
Yeah.
integrated in.
Yes. Yeah. In fact,
Wonderful.
our rates often reflected our requirement to have training on every single project. So it was built into our rate structure. We didn't have to put a separate line item in for training.
Okay. Great. 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 Okay. So basically what you're saying is you took responsibility and accountability for formal training on your project. It's the project manager's role to ensure this happens.
That would be my assumption. Yes, a lot of times that has to be prompted, perhaps from the executive, because they don't want you to fail or slow down. But yeah, definitely the project manager has to ensure that he or she has a fully trained and equipped staff.
So let's extend this out. Number one, your clients. Did your clients ever have to be coached and mentored in the value of training, like going to them and say, hey, we're going to be training? Was there any pushback or confusion on that?
No, and that was a very important, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a very important aspect of many of our projects. So we would hit the ground running with an IT staff. We'd have business analysts, systems analysts, IT developers, so very much technology focused. But when we would bring on the client staff or the customer staff to work as full-time members of our project team, we needed them to also be infused with certain amount of training. Now, we didn't train them in Java or C+ or those things, but perhaps we introduced a automated testing tool that they had to run for their user acceptance testing. We would have to train them on that. Or just the whole concept, perhaps, of decision trees and decision tables in structuring logic for their requirements gathering. We had to train them on what that meant. So yeah, we often ourselves, as part of the project, built that into our timelines to train our customer staff, our client staff, to work with us on the project.
Wow.
Does that kind of answer your the question?
Oh, yes, it does. So this is something that you were consciously accountable for, and you integrated in formal training. A lot of my students actually question this and say, shouldn't I get the team already trained? And I have had a hard time articulating this. And you just did a really good job of the value of how this occurs. Now, I do understand you work in a very specialized domain, project management.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's been your equivalent experience, Tim? Has it kind of filtered along those lines, or?
Yeah, but from both a consulting standpoint as well as an internal project standpoint, training was a consideration. The costs were primarily indirect when I had internal projects, but it was a conscious decision and a communication. The other thing I had to do was coach the team a lot and say, number one, we're going to find skills and knowledge that we don't have that we need, and we're going to have to spin each other up. Number two, I am not the source and the be all and the end all. I'm not the technical expert. So I expect you guys to be responsible when you find a gap or you find an opportunity for growth, that you work together and you coach and mentor each other. And so that was just built into part of the team charter. We're going to help each other grow as we learn to grow together. It had to be go hand in hand.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, up until now, my responses to your questions were along the lines of a more formal training, some more technical training for my team, and more kind of understanding of the domain of system development for my client staff who were brought onto our project. But I think there's also, besides those two more formal aspects of project delivery training, I think there are other aspects of training that project managers must not ignore. Things like just how to get along with each other.
Yeah, we'll explore that in a minute.
Okay.
So as a project manager, I sometimes put into my kickoff slide set a big ABT slide, which says always be training. It was a message that said, we're going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to get better. It's the continuous improvement, whether we're looking at Kaizen, whether we're looking at Deming Short and their PDCA, plan, do, check, and act, or whether we're informally or formally training. And when we say informal training, it's really interesting. What triggers in your mind when we say or ask informal training?
Well, it's kind of on the job training, and I think that sometimes is more effective. So let me give you an example. On one of the projects, we sent a whole staff of developers. We knew we had won the project, so we sent a whole staff of developers to formal training in the technology that we were implementing the system in. When they came back, they had the rudimentary aspects of that technology and were equipped to hit the ground running. However, there's a lot of, and you know this from your coding days, there's a lot of finesse to the coding. So a lot of times we would then institute brown bag lunches, say on a Friday afternoon, where the more qualified, more experienced people in those technologies would show the tricks of the trade to those people who had their formal training, their off-site, paid for formal training. But when they came back in, they would be showing some of the tricks of the trade and how to finesse some better coding techniques, some better, and that became part of an expectation on a Friday. People looked forward to that because they became better developers, just from that whole on-the-job training aspect.
Yeah, we did this too. We were playing with help desk and implementing a help desk and trying to extend the help desk to, instead of just having people cry for help, have systems cry for help. And we were looking at one of the engineers' skills in Visual Basic. It was VBasic back then. And the ability to actually use TCP/IP calls and have it say through a pager and have it automatically trigger a pager response to say this server is down, or this server is slow, or this server has this error, so that we could actually watch over the weekends various components of the network either being healthy or going down. We did the same thing.
You know, I still remember my days because, you know, as a project manager, not only is Microsoft Project or one of the equivalent tools your basic tool set, but for some reason and somehow Excel became your number one tool as a project manager.
Yes.
And it was amazing how I'd be working on something and one of my staff would be looking over my shoulder and they go, no, don't do it like that. And they'd grab my cursor and they'd go along and say, watch this. And they'd show me something and it would save minutes. But, you know, you do that repetitive motion 40, 50 times in a session, you're saving half an hour. And it's amazing how I was a very skilled Excel practitioner, but a young person out of college would come in, put their hand over my shoulder, grab my mouse and just show me some of the better tricks of the trade. So that was sort of really informal on the job training, and it was very much welcome.
This is the whole mindset and the heart of Kaizen. You know, small continuous improvements and the ability to both give and receive that, and creating an environment where it's not just accepted, but it's expected that this is how we're going to work together. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Tim, before you became and I know you were president of a PMI chapter and involved in the board and heavily involved in now your PMI related teaching of classes and that sort of thing. But before you got that involved, were you ever given the opportunity or had the opportunity to take project management formal training?
Oh, yes. In fact, they offered a boot camp back in 2002. They offered about 12 tickets to the big boot camps they had back then, and I grabbed one. But at the same time, the Skillsoft was deeply integrated into my company as well, and so I was doing a lot of online computer-based training as well.
Yeah, it's in my case was similar. Now I came from an IT system development company. We delivered for projects. My first 14 years in the industry. And we were well known for our project management principles, but a lot of us didn't have certifications. We ended up working with each other and just working on internal delivered project management classes. And I remember being sent to American Management Association class in Washington, D.C. And I remember to this day, the teacher, his name was Ira Bitts. Kind of think of, for people who watch Mary Tyler Moore, think of Lou Mary Tyler Moore's boss, he was kind of like the Lou. Now this guy was so down to earth. And here's what caught my eye. It wasn't so much that he taught techniques. He didn't get into, all the principles of Microsoft Project and all that sort of thing. What he got into was the philosophies around being a good project manager. And as he drilled that in, he used story, story upon story, and it just stuck with me. And here's what really caught my eye with Mr. Bitts was that before class, he studied every one of us, knew where we came from. And I remember being surprised when the first question he called me out specifically by my name. He said, now your company does this, this, and this. Tell the rest of the class how that works for you. So it was amazing how that formal training in project management, he took such an interest in us that it made it just wide open, made us kind of open our eyes as to what was possible and really drilled it into us with story.
Man, there's so much to unpack with what you just said. Storytelling. If you want to teach somebody, storytelling is really important. I've been reading up on this the last 6 weeks, and telling stories does some really strange things. First of all, it actually aligns the brain waves with the storyteller and the people listening. They literally have synchronized brains while this is going on. And it fires in a different part of your brain. It fires in a deeper, older part. So when you're actually telling stories, it's going back into the emotions and the experience. And this is why teachers and trainers and even writers, creatives say storytelling is one of the greatest ways to impact and teach people.
Oh, I firmly believe that because, well, especially in this man's way of doing things, because his stories were so relevant to us, whether we were a first-time project manager or a fairly experienced project manager. And he would bring up stories that we had all been through. And suddenly the theory he was teaching became real and became practical. We literally could take those back to our projects the next day and implement them.
Experiential. And this is going to be important in a few minutes. Really important. Now, my coach was like Uncle Charlie in My Three Sons, right? The big bulbous nose, the grouchy, looking through like this at you. And he was the same way. And he'd say things that were really prescient. And he was saying, yeah, you have to memorize this. But you know what? It's not the memorization that's going to get you through the exam. It's the mindset.
Yep.
It's the attitude and behavior. Now, this is what's interesting. Let's get back into training. So if we were really effective trainers, we wouldn't just train in skills like Excel, right? In the projects, we need to train the other things that, number one, are hard to express. Number two, actually change our behaviors.
No, that's true. I understand that. So fill in a little more. I think I'm getting where you're going with this.
Okay. So when I'm teaching training, I don't talk about training skills. Okay. I talk about training competencies. And a competence is 3 pieces: the skill, the ability to do something, the actions and steps. That's your Excel. The knowledge, the information required to do something. That's the information and the data that's all coming at you that you have to sort through and understand. And then attributes. Attributes, the definition is quality or feature regarded as a characteristic. And from a human standpoint, attributes are defined as a component of behavior or character. So if you want to look about training and education, it's not just skills and knowledge, but how we behave and act.
Well, and I think, didn't we some time ago do a session, maybe 2 sessions, podcasts on emotional intelligence? And I think part of what you're getting at is exactly that. Some of it can be formally trained, or even if you're doing brown bag lunches or taking a person aside on the project and working with that person. But some of it has to be modeled, I think. If you have a person, I'm just going to go on a limb here. If you have a person that comes to your project that, say, came from an experience of childhood distrust and carried that into their adulthood, that person isn't naturally bent towards trusting everyone on the team. But I think if you and the team model trust and get into situations that bring that person to the point, you can actually get to that point where that person becomes more trusting. And trust, I'm sorry, if you're going to run a good, solid project, you have to have each other's back. There has to be a trust element as one of the attributes of a good project manager and his or her staff.
Yes, yes. And you don't learn it from reading a book.
Right.
Learn it from being immersed in it, just like swimming. Now, let's take another one besides trust. Let's look at responsibility. And some of us have never been given a chance to experience responsibility. And it has nothing to do with dysfunction. It has to do with our environmental experiences. So before they can actually do something without being told, that's responsibility. We have to, number one, teach them what it feels like. Number two, give them an opportunity to try it out and make mistakes and learn from it. And number three, demonstrate to us and themselves in order to understand they have it. Now, this gets into a really weird space, Merv. My students, a lot of times in almost every class, one of my students asked, but Tim, I don't have an opportunity to learn how to be a leader. Where can I learn to be a leader? And I have student zero, and this is one of my bags of tricks I use. Student zero is you, especially in these attributes. I say that before you can actually teach others, you teach yourself, and you try these things out on yourself. And this is what we were talking about in emotional intelligence. Try these things out, see what works with you, see what resonates with you, see what doesn't work with you, because if it works with you, it's pretty well going to work with others.
Well, and responsibility, I think, is a great example of an attribute, not only from what you just talked about, but also from you. Now, you and I are a little older than the people that we would normally manage at this point in our careers. But there's also a responsibility on us not to put our requirements on that person. And the example I'm trying to get to is I've worked with a lot of millennials, and I don't want to characterize them all this way, but a lot of the young people that I've worked with, and when I say young, I'm probably in the 20s and 30s, they would prefer to work late and come in late, whereas I'm of the age where I prefer to come in very early, get a lot of things out of the way, and then work with my team and maybe leave by dinner time or so, just to get, just to have some sort of semblance of day. But just because I get into the office at 7 a.m. as a responsible project manager doesn't mean that I need to infuse that into all of my young charges, that they have to also be in there at 7 a.m. because I am. Now, the responsibility part is, well, I don't want somebody dragging in at 9, somebody dragging in at noon. What we really want to do is figure out a way as a team to come together and say, let's make our day start at, maybe it's 9 a.m. and let's everyone be there and have some core hours. But it's a good way of kind of putting this particular attribute, this particular characteristic on both yourself and your team, so that you come to a very strong working arrangement.
Yes. Consensus, right?
We may not, another attribute.
We may not agree with that as our favorite time, but we agree that because of the way our team is, this is the best way our team can work. And that's what the true definition of consensus is.
Exactly. Using that example too. Now, if I left at 6 o'clock to go have dinner and go back to my place, I still had my phone on. So if someone at 9 o'clock needed something, they could always call me. So we always had those arrangements. But yeah, in terms of back to the training concept that you and I are talking about, there is formal training, but there is also this modeling that we can't teach formally. And I think that's a great example.
Yeah. I first twigged on to this really from a conscious standpoint when my son was going through Cub Scouts, and the Scoutmaster had been a Scoutmaster since 1961. And he was coaching the dads as much as he was coaching the kids. And he was always talking about being on the outlook or being aware of teachable moments, looking and observing and capturing data and understanding where a gentle nudge and an opportunity to learn and grow was exposing itself, either with individuals or with kids working together, or dads or kids, or even dads or dads. And it was amazing to watch him. He was actually a master at managing by walking around without getting the work done.
That's amazing. And that's not even in a work environment. That's just
no, it's in a human environment.
Yeah. No, that's great. But back to, so back to what we were just talking about. What about things, and I'm going to come in the middle of formal training, the technology of the technology you're using on the system that you're building, or the project management skills you need to have. And then there's the modeling that we just talked about. But somewhere in the middle is something that is often ignored. And that's things like presentation skills, writing skills, conflict management. How do you think we should go about training those while we're on the project?
Let's take conflict management.
Sure.
So you're familiar with the Tuckman Model or Tuckman ladder, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we form, we storm, we norm, we perform, right? Okay, storming is where conflict first emerges. And it emerges in storming, not because you have problems with the project itself, but because people are getting relaxed. Number one, they're behaving more naturally around others. And number two, they're able to speak up, and they feel they can have a say in things. So people come to me and say, Tim, move your coffee cup. I don't like it close to your paperwork. Okay, that's conflict. It's not a conflict that will take the project down, but it's a teachable moment. Now, this is where a manager or leader needs to be proactive, an opportunity to teach skills that will be useful in the work before it impacts the work. I have time to actually model as well as coach and mentor in conflict management.
No, that's great. I was going to use the example also of a presentation skills. I had the privilege one time of having a team that was entirely made up of young Asians who had come over to America probably in the last year to 3 to 5 years, somewhere in there. My entire team was these Asian Americans that came over. And all of them, to a person, wanted to improve their presentation skills. Now, I've been involved in presentation skills building for some time, but the project did not permit me to have time to do it. So I asked them if they would put in some time in the evenings to work on it, and they all agreed yes. So I found a local organization, so you may have heard of it, called Toastmasters International, brought them in, and they did an 8-week session once a week for 8 weeks to help them build their presentation skills, not in a way of I'm going to suddenly become a keynote speaker to 500 people, but made them competent to the point where they could at least present their status report to their customer equivalent. So from that perspective, I think it cost me $20 a student or something to have this volunteer organization, Toastmasters International, come in, teach them, and leave. And they were all incredibly grateful for that opportunity and willingly gave up 2 hours an evening once a week. So there's other ways. I think there's very creative ways that we can use to help people with their skills development, even without necessarily going out and paying monstrous fees to some training company.
Yes, yes. It takes forethought. It takes a little bit of creativity, but sometimes doing that has greater impact than actually putting a class together and setting aside time in a hotel room.
Yeah. And, I was going to mention before, we talked a little bit about the formal project management training. Here's the other thing that I found, and I've worked with companies that have sent, say, team leaders ready for their first project management gig, sent them off to formal training, and it just wasn't built for them. But when I brought in people like you or me, people like ourselves who have had tons of experience, or like Ira Bitts, who I talked about earlier, when I brought them in and tailored the course specifically from their experience to the experience our young folks were about to have, it was 10 times better than what we paid to another company that were speaking just from their normal materials and didn't tailor anything. So I found that very helpful too, is that we could find people who could train from experience, not just from books.
Yeah, yeah, and this speaks again to the requirement for a little bit of forethought and a little bit of creativity. That's great.
Yeah.
Let's extend the conversation. You talked about clients. Let's broaden the term from clients to stakeholders, whether it's internal or external. How do you approach training stakeholders as well?
I want to say stealthily, because a lot of stakeholders, first of all, they're paying you. This is from my experience. I came on as their IT person or whatever, so they're paying you to do a job for them. So why should you train them, right? I mean, they're the boss, right? In essence, and I'm kind of generalizing, but a lot of times we end up in those situations. But what I found was the first thing you do is you gain their trust. You gain their, whatever it is, you build on that trust, you build that relationship. Relationship comes first. My company is called People First Project Management. Literally, even with my clients, I put the people first, even before the project, just in terms of understanding who they are, what their needs are. And I watch very carefully. They don't know it, but I watch very carefully to see what skills they are lacking in order to be full-time contributors to the project. Because clients and customers, stakeholders, have an absolute need to contribute effectively, efficiently, and not take up a lot of the team's time. So I would watch for those skills gaps, and then I would take opportunities to fill them in normal conversation.
Very good, very good. And yeah, it's the understanding of why first. What are the gaps? And how does this benefit the project? And if you believe in it, your conviction and your confidence in communicating this, not just telling them, but in your actions of communicating, it's a pretty easy sell. The how comes out, and the what are the results, and the what is always going to point back to the value. It makes it easier for the stakeholders to contribute and participate. It makes the project easier.
Now, I have been in situations too with stakeholders where, I remember this one time very, very clearly. I'm looking ahead at the project plan. The stakeholder, the customer side, the recipients of the new system hired me as their kind of oversight to oversee the project, the IT vendor who they hired as well. And so as I'm doing my job, overseeing the work of the IT vendor, I'm looking ahead at the project plan, and I see in 8 or 9 months, the user acceptance test is coming up. And so I go to my counterpart, in this case, it was the CIO, no, the CEO of the organization. I said, do you realize that you need to have staff prepared to acceptance test the system? And her response was, yeah, not a problem. They'll just go and bang away at a few keys and see what happens. They'll find errors. And I said, no. Let me explain to you what user acceptance test really means. And when I finished my 5 minutes with her, her face was ashen. It's like, we have how much? Only 8 months to prepare. And I said, give me, and I picked her staff. I picked 20 of her staff. And for the next several months, I educated them in user acceptance testing, how to write test cases, how to work with the software, how to prioritize defects, how to retest when they came back, so that by the time user acceptance testing came, they were prepared. So that, again, that was kind of a, how would you say it? I educated my stakeholder and then got her permission to formally educate her staff.
This is a real difficult one too, because you're looking at somebody of higher rank and authority. What has been your experience with this, and how would you coach somebody in being successful in educating somebody of higher rank?
I think it depends on that person of higher rank. My experience has been, as I worked, as I got older too, I got more respect. I don't know why, but I got a little more respect. But I think as long as you can show your competence, number one, your listening skills to their needs, number two, and number three, just get into that relationship building. So even if the person is a CEO and I am a IT consultant, that gap in authority, I can still bridge that gap just by working with that person relationally till they get to the point where they rely on me for certain things. And then at that point, once that relationship and trust is established, the coaching can happen just in the way you frame your wording.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. And this is any time that you're working with somebody outside your culture. And when we say executives have a totally different culture than we do. In their environment and world, they're decision makers and they're drivers of the vision. And we have to go into that relationship understanding that that's the role we validate it to, right? But at the same time, we speak their language, they work in their environment. It's not that we have to bring them into ours. And that's what we're doing. We're doing that with our team, with our stakeholders, and with our executives.
And I learned that the hard way. One of my first project where I managed the project, and it was for the state of Hawaii. And until I understood culturally how a lot, they work with a lot of kind of face saving, whereas what I was used to from the mainland was more of an assertive or aggressive approach to project management. So for those people who needed to be coached along the way and save face along the way as well, that aggressive or assertive style did not work there. And it took me about 2 experiences before I learned that I needed to first of all understand that culture better, but I needed to develop my relationships in a different way. So even every client situation, and this goes, by the way, even if you are an internal IT department and used to working with your staff, your CEO may change, and then you have to develop a brand new relationship. So there's always that.
So you're actually describing the effort in training and coaching and mentoring as a lot of effort in understanding the people who you're going to train, not just, what their capabilities are right now, what the gaps are, but what environment do they work from? What do they have as a context? And what is the gap between not just the individual's knowledge, but their whole, like I said, their whole background. This seems like it's a lot of effort.
It is a lot of effort, but it's effort and I'll tell you where it really pays off. There is nothing more satisfying than having a customer who not only ends up with a successful project, but who likes you along the way. Using my Hawaii experience, my wife and I vacation often in Hawaii. Every single time we still meet with my long time ago customer once or twice while we're on vacation for dinner and just to catch up. So not only was the project successful, but the relationship that was built has lasted for years. So yeah.
So let's talk about this. Have we talked about coaching and mentoring before?
I probably as adjunct conversations to the main topic.
Let's go ahead and review that. Go ahead and give your definition or just a general description of the difference between coaching and mentoring.
That's a good question. I didn't really pay much. Well, mentoring, I think from my perspective, comes more from what I talked about before, from kind of a modeling. First of all, if you are mentoring, the person has to almost be requesting that mentoring or expecting that mentoring. Coaching may be a little no, you know what? I don't know, Tim. I think in my mind, they're about the same thing. What's yours?
So there are certain words associated to both those models. Mentoring is associated with the relationship, and coaching is related with the skill.
Okay.
Coaching is where I take you to a certain level in capabilities like Excel. Here's the skill. Here's what you're learning. You've learned it. We're done. That's what a coach does. And I had a voice coach when I was in university studying music and singing. And he said, Tim, this is not about you and me. This is not about the relationship. Trust me in working with this skill. I'll improve your skill. That's all we're doing here. He was very articulate in doing that. Mentoring is where you build a relationship, a sounding board, a validation component, somebody you can go to on a regular basis, not just for a how-to, but for the experience of the transition of learning from here to there. And it's really valuable when you're developing attributes, not just skills.
No, that makes sense. From when I used to work for a company before I went consulting on my own, we had a formal mentoring program where, and by the way, the mentoring, people were assigned to you as a mentor. So I was a mentor to 3 or 4 staff. We as a mentor or them as a mentee could, in fact, say, no, I don't want that relationship. I want someone else. So we had that freedom without any kind of penalty. But it was a formal mentoring. So I, as a project manager, may have inherited a systems analyst or a business analyst. My job was to not only coach them and mentor them in their job. So coaching on the skills, I see what you're saying now, coaching on the skills of analysis, mentoring on the skills of relationships and conflict management. That was part of my job as their career mentor. Yeah, that makes sense.
I had plenty of coaches in my last corporate experience, and I had 3 mentors who were all vice presidents. And it wasn't an open door per se, but it was an opportunity for me to reach out and say, hey, I'm experiencing this. Do you have a context? Can you actually help me figure out a better approach to this? Now, my company took it like what your company was talking about, mentoring, succession planning. They're looking for people who are open to learn and grow into the areas of leadership.
No, that's definitely the kind of model that we ended up following. And by the way, the dreaded end of year staff evaluation. There was a 360. Well, there was a 360, but part of that was all of your mentees were instructed to rate you on your ability to mentor. So for a few weeks, they became your mentors because you had to learn from what it was that they thought worked well for them and what they thought could have been improved.
Well, and again, the sign of a great teacher is walking into a classroom and saying, you're all my teachers.
Yeah.
because they and their questions and their behaviors are going to hit your triggers and are going to hit your gaps in knowledge. And yes, you're going to make mistakes as a teacher and trainer, but at the same point, if you look at these not as obstacles, but opportunities to grow, you're going to not just be competitive, but you're going to actually get rid of those obstacles quicker.
And, as a project manager, that's where the whole thing comes. You can't have that pride of achieving, that lofty goal of being the manager, because you're always in that learn mode. I can always do better. And I've been mentored by the office receptionist in certainly where she'll call me over and say, hey, I saw how you handled that situation. Can I offer you a different approach? Because I don't think you left that person feeling the best the way you handled that. And it was, she felt she could approach me as our receptionist. I felt perfectly okay with her approaching me. There was no status requirement. But for those project managers who feel, that they're above that, then I think they lose out, because then people don't approach them.
It's called hubris. Yeah. Hubris, which is I know because I'm smart, because I went to school, because I have formal training, because I have a credential, I know better than you. And you can't approach relationships in thinking I know about relationships better than you, because these people have been working on an area of relationships that you have nothing to know about, which is their business, their environment, and their culture.
Well, and this young man, the receptionist, when he saw how I handled a particular situation, he could relate, because he was the exact same age as the person that I had been dealing with. And so he could pull me over and say, I think had you said it this way, it would have been accepted in a better way, or, just some. And so there is exactly what you're saying, is that we don't know everything. And there are those people who can observe as third parties and help us with that situation.
So here's the trick. Okay. The most masterful people who were training, whether it was a work or a project environment, were teaching and mentoring just as the nature of how they did business. How do you get to that level of teaching without someone knowing that you're teaching?
I think it comes from experience and learning to be helpful without being overly helpful, without being kind of pushy or nagging or obtrusive. So if there, again, it has to come back to relationship. And if you have a good relationship with your team or your peers or your managers, then it begins to fall in place and you can coach. And what I found in my particular experience is that as I gained more experience in projects as a whole, I began to see things where we were inefficient. And then I could approach those situations, be it one person, two, or a whole team, and work through it, just talk through it and ask for their input based on what I was observing. And so the coaching is always there. And I think as you become more and more familiar with, first of all, the trade that you're in, and you become more familiar with those areas that could be improved all the time, then you're prepared to be that coach. And it just becomes second nature. You don't even think about it. You don't even say, I'm going to coach in this situation. It just naturally comes out.
One of the things that clicked with me was when when a student said, Tim, how much quality and how much quality activities do I build into my project? How much training time? How much time in process analysis, quality assurance, right? And I got into the material, and I forget whether it was a Duran quote or a Deming quote, but you stop adding more quality when the benefits do not exceed the investment. It's a benefit cost relationship. And so I actually took that mindset and applied that to training. When the training is not really valuable, when it's getting in the way of the work, when it's no longer improving the work, but getting in the way of the work, that's the time to back off training.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think of the quote somebody once. It's something along the lines of "good is better than perfect when it's done," or something along those lines.
Yes,
Because
yes.
you can get into perfect, you can get into this analysis paralysis, you can get into this perfection mode, and everything is squeaky clean. But in the meantime, you've lost all kinds of days on your project when good would have been good enough.
And when we get into the training aspect, not just the quality, training should be looked at that as well. We don't have to have a division of leaders, who are able to walk into every corporation and immediately command and control. What we're looking at is people who have concepts, who actually, through learning these things, can improve the performance of the team and the work.
Exactly. I still remember many times when early on in my public speaking career, I'd get off stage and I'd kick myself and I'd berate myself. And people go, "What's wrong? Why? You just did a great job. What happened?" "Well, I missed this whole part of my speech." And people go and they say, "Oh, I never noticed." And I'm looking at those hundreds of people out there. They didn't notice. So clearly it didn't matter. And it's one of those situations where sometimes you're perfect is almost an impediment because it puts you down for yourself. Whereas if you had realized that your good is absolutely good enough or excellent in the minds of those you were serving, you don't have to be perfect.
Right,
Just
right. And it's understanding the minds of the people you're serving. That's who you have to satisfy. I made a mistake in a lot of my classes because I love statistics. And I used to invest a lot of time in teaching weighted 3-point estimation because a lot of people don't understand the power of the normal distribution, how it can help you estimate, right? I became so enamored on this, I would spend 45 minutes to an hour and a half. And I was mortified at the beginning of the year. They just said, that's an adjunct. It may or may not show up on the exam. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm not going to have fun teaching this part of the material. It has nothing to do with fun. It has to do with results. And that's the problem that I had to get over, that bias.
and to remember that it's not about you, it's about them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the big thing. The major effort of a manager and leader is setting aside your ego and putting it aside for the benefit of what the work is doing and what the purpose of the work truly is. That's when we realize, whether it's training or quality or just assembling, the various parts of the plan, doing it to the point where the project can be as successful as it can be.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, as you were mentioning that last part, that in my 40 plus years of working in projects, I have not had a single project where the timeline was easy. So using that as my premise, and you've probably experienced the same thing, how do we continue to have that ability to constantly train while at the same time expecting our staff to make every project deadline so that we're successful? How do we have time to constantly train?
Using the work as the medium of the training. And that's the only thing that I found. Tying in the work with the training medium, not necessarily setting aside a classroom, although that's valuable, or maybe a conference room to go over some whiteboarding, but actually using the work itself as the medium for coaching and training. And that's the best tool. Number one, they get to try out what they're learning right now. And that's in the theory of learning. You want to put the learning as close to the work as you want to.
Yeah.
And number two, It's actually getting them to experience something before they understand its value. It's a lot like in the movie Karate Kid with Mr. Miyagi. You know, here he is forcing the kid to wash all these broken down cars and wax them and paint the fences. And little does the kid know that he's actually teaching him formal karate moves. And the kid is learning before he actually learns the skills that he thought he was learning.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense, because if you just put people into a training situation and they don't even realize why they're being trained that way, because they haven't experienced the frustration of perhaps failing at something or not doing as good a job at something that the training then takes care of, that makes a lot of sense.
And the perception of training is really strange. To a person in the classroom, to a person in all of my classes, they think training is, let me memorize some stuff and I'll be good and I'll be able to pass the exam, or I'll be able to do this work. Give me the paper. I'll just repeat what's on the paper. That's not training. That's not education. It's the ability to apply that knowledge, not acquire it, but apply that knowledge in solving problems. And so my premise is that the true education is not in the learning or the acquisition of the knowledge or education. It's the actual demonstration and going through it until it's a natural behavior.
You know, that's interesting. I just sat through a couple of the last 2 weeks. I sat through a couple of long presentations by, and I won't name them, but industry experts in certain technologies, and listened to them and came away with facts, but also realizing that these people had never been in the real world applying what they were trying to explain to us. And it came across, at least it did to me, because I wanted the underlying experience. You know, when you ask them a question, they could quote the manual, but they couldn't quote how it really affected them on the job, because they'd never used it on the job. So yeah,
yeah, exactly. We're getting back to the storytelling. We're getting back to the touching, the limbic system, the series of pieces of brain that actually resonate. Recognition is important. Memorization of facts and figures is important, but it's just the foundation of what training really is. It's the comprehension. It's playing with these little pieces, tooling together, turning them around, flipping them over, taking them apart and putting together, see what you have new. And that's what we need to be doing, not in a classroom, but actually in the actual work itself.
Well, yeah, and it's like things like earned value, right? We teach our people earned value. I learn it once to put into an Excel program, and then I don't have to worry about the formulas anymore. But how does earned value help me to manage a project? So it's one thing to know how to do earned value. It's another thing to know how to use earned value.
Right. And in the classroom, it's not knowing the formulas, but understanding which questions the formulas answer.
Exactly.
Is this a trend question? Is this a status question? Is this a forecast question? Am I looking at benefit to cost? And this takes time.
So for those people listening to us right now who are either just earned their PMP or want to write their PMP exam, yes, go ahead and learn it for the exam, but please learn it so that you can apply it on your first or next project.
Yeah, and honestly, if you're going to be coaching and training people, practice a lot and expect to change the way you present this over the next 10 or 12 years. I really believe in the Feynman technique of refining the way you describe something until you're able to describe it to an 8th grader in the US and they understand what you're saying. If you can't do that, you're not an effective communicator.
Well, and think about that for your clients, because your clients who are not initiated into IT development, but still need to understand enough to help you develop their systems, you need to be able to explain a lot of those concepts to them, which may be the 8th grade student.
And again, it's not talking down to people. It
Exactly.
definitely is not talking down. It's talking in a way that they can easily understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
I don't know that we've even come close to exhausting this topic, but I think if I were a project manager listening to you and I would definitely come away with some ideas about what training and coaching and mentoring really means. Not just facts in brain, but truly concepts that you can apply in your project. That's what I
Yes.
would take away.
Yeah. And for those of you who are more curious, you can always contact us. There's some links in the YouTube channel as well as on this recording. And where can we find you to ask questions directly to you, Merv?
Well, I like questions on LinkedIn, and I also love it when people go to my blog on my website, peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com, and make comments on some of my project management concept blogs. And yourself?
Excellent. I'm over at LinkedIn right now. I'm building an infrastructure where you can reach out to me through other tools, but LinkedIn is the fastest.
Yeah, and I think for people who follow project management and who follow IT, LinkedIn is a great place to learn many of the concepts that we've been teaching here on these podcasts. So,
Indeed, indeed. Well, thanks again, Merv. Thanks for your time, and looking forward to interacting with you through this show in the future.
absolutely. So same time, same channel next week.
Sounds good. Thanks again.
All right.